Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're digging into a stack of sources. We've got scientific papers, conference talks, all kinds of things.
Yeah, all focusing on this technology that's, well, it's quietly really changing how we look at rocks and minerals. Automated mineralogy.
Think of this as your fast track. We're going to try and unpack what it is, how it actually works, how it gets all this detailed info.
And maybe more importantly, why it's becoming such a big deal across geoscience. I mean, everything from finding critical minerals, which is huge right now.
Huge.
To managing environmental impacts.
Exactly. And these sources, they're straight from the researchers, the people really pushing this technique forward.
So our job today is basically to pull out the key takeaways, the really important bits so you can quickly get a handle on what automated mineralogy can do and, well, what it means.
Okay, let's dive in. So fundamentally, what is automated mineralogy? Based on these sources, what are we actually talking about?
Well, the sources describe it as fundamentally a technique using quantitative chemistry. It's usually built around standard lab gear like SEM, scanning electron microscopy.
Right, SEM.
And EDS, energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, familiar tools.
Okay, electron beams, X-rays, standard stuff. But it's not just using them the old way, is it? The sources really stress something unique about how it pulls the data together.
That's the key difference, yeah. What makes it really stand out is that it combines, in just one single analysis, 3 crucial bits of information about the sample at the same time.
3 things at once. Okay, what are they?
You get the mineralogy, like what minerals are actually in your sample.
Okay.
You get quantitative analysis, how much of each mineral you have, or even how much of certain elements.
Right, the amounts.
And crucially, the elemental composition, which specific elements make up those minerals.
Yeah.
And it's all linked together spatially, pixel by pixel.
Wow, okay. So not just IDing, but quantifying and getting the chemistry all mapped out. And you mentioned it's not totally new. The sources call it an evolution.
Yes, that's a point that comes up a lot. It definitely builds on the legacy of older automated systems, things like MLA and CumaScan that have been around for a bit.
Right, I've heard of those.
So automated mineralogy takes those basic ideas and adds new capabilities. It's designed to be more of a one-stop shop, you could say, for getting a really deep understanding of the sample. Composition, texture, the whole picture.
Okay, one-stop shop. I like that. That makes sense as a definition.
Yeah.
But how does it actually do it? Let's get into the nuts and bolts based on these papers.
Okay, the basics. It usually starts like traditional SEM-EDs. You've got a focused electron beam hitting the sample surface. And that interaction, that electron beam hitting the material, makes the sample give off X-rays.
And that's where the EDS detector jumps in?
Precisely. The EDS detector measures the energy of those X-rays and also how many X-rays of each energy come off. It does this at lots and lots of tiny points pixels across the sample surface.
So you end up with an X-ray fingerprint, a spectrum, for every single pixel.
Exactly. A unique X-ray spectrum for each little spot.
And this is where the automated part and the software really become critical.
Absolutely. The real magic, or maybe the real complexity, is in the software. It takes all those measured spectra, one for every pixel.
Thousands. Millions.
Yeah, millions potentially. And it automatically compares them against a huge library. This library has reference data, fingerprints for known minerals or standards, or even spectra generated synthetically from known chemistries.
And based on how well they match, it decides, okay, this pixel is quartz or this one's pyrite.
That's the core idea. It classifies the mineral at each pixel. But, the tech has evolved quite a bit to handle tricky situations that used to be real problems for older systems.
Tricky situations? Like what?
Well, the sources talk a lot about the mixed spectrum problem.
Yeah.
At the boundary between 2 different mineral grains.
Right. The beam might hit both at once.
Exactly. The interaction volume of the beam is finite, so it can stand across 2 or even more mineral phases. You get a mixed signal, a spectrum that's a blend.
So what happens then? Does it just get confused?
Not anymore, really. The advanced software can actually look at that mixed spectrum, identify the likely minerals contributing to it, and then mathematically deconvolute the signal. It can estimate the proportions of each mineral within that single mixed pixel.
Wow, hold on. So it can sort of see inside the pixel. That's pretty amazing for fine-grained stuff.
It's incredibly powerful, yeah. Especially for complex textures. And it's not just mixed pixels. It can also handle minerals that don't have a perfectly fixed chemical formula.
You mean like solid solutions, where elements substitute for each other?
Precisely. Minerals that form solid solutions or have, impurities or variations in their composition. The software isn't just looking for one perfect spectral match anymore. It can be trained, using examples or rules, to understand and classify these minerals with variable compositions.
So it learns the natural variability. That makes sense. And I thought this was interesting. It doesn't just rely on matching the shape of the spectrum, right? It can use the actual measured chemistry, too.
Yes, that's another layer of sophistication. It can classify minerals using the measured percent mass fraction values of the elements calculated from the spectrum at that pixel.
How does that help?
It gives you deeper chemical insight right alongside the mineral ID. It directly links the specific quantitative chemistry measured at that spot to the mineral classification, rather than just relying on a general spectral pattern match. It's more robust.
Okay, so we've got this amazing pixel-by-pixel analysis happening, but one of the huge advantages the sources kept highlighting was scale the ability to analyze really big areas, like a whole geological thin section. How does it manage that large scale, but still keep the detail?
That's a key part of the automation. The system is programmed to automatically acquire data from many, many small, high-resolution fields of view across the sample.
Like taking lots of small pictures.
Exactly. And then it stitches them together digitally, seamlessly, into one large map of the entire area you defined.
And why is looking at such a large area so important? Why not just analyze a few interesting spots?
Well, rocks, geological samples in general, they're almost always heterogeneous. They vary from place to place.
Right.
So analyzing just one tiny spot, or even a few selected grains, might not give you a statistically meaningful or representative picture of the whole sample. You need that large area map to get reliable results, especially for things like overall mineral abundance or understanding textures.
Okay, so you get the big picture view, but you said it keeps the high resolution. How detailed are we talking across that whole large map?
The resolution can be really impressive. For the imaging part, like the backscattered electron image or BSE, you might be getting resolutions down to, say, 100 nanometers.
Wow, okay.
For the actual EDS chemical measurements, the step size between pixels might be on the order of microns, maybe even finer depending on what you're looking for and how much time you have. You can tailor it.
It sounds like you end up with this incredibly rich spatial data set. There's a great analogy in the sources.
Yeah, the Google Earth view of your sample. That's a good one.
Explain that.
Because the data is stored intelligently, you can have this huge map of the entire thin section, but you could zoom right in smoothly down to see the finest details of individual grain boundaries or tiny inclusions. The software only loads the data for the area you're currently viewing, making it manageable.
That capability is fantastic, but it must have a downside. The sources were pretty clear about one major challenge.
Like chuckle. Oh, yeah. The data volume. It's enormous. Analyzing large areas at high resolution creates massive data sets. We're talking gigabytes, easily, sometimes terabytes.
Terabytes from one sample.
Potentially, yeah. So just managing, storing, and then effectively mining that huge amount of data for insights, that's actually become a significant bottleneck and area of development. It's the too much data problem, really.
You need some serious computing power and clever software just to handle it all. Okay, what about prepping the sample? Is that still pretty old school?
The sample prep itself is quite similar to traditional methods for electron microscopy.
Yeah.
You usually need a polished surface, often mounted in epoxy resin, to make sure it's flat and conductive for the electron beam.
So, standard polishing.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But the automation does extend to sample handling. Modern systems often have holders where you can load multiple polished sections or blocks at once.
Ah, so you can set it up and walk away.
Exactly. You can program it with saved analysis parameters and let it run unattended, maybe overnight or over a weekend, analyzing multiple samples sequentially. That improves throughput significantly.
Okay, we've covered identifying minerals, mapping them out, getting quantities, but the sources really emphasized how this tech unlocks much deeper chemical insights within those minerals. Tell us more about that quantitative side.
Right. This is where it goes way beyond just counting minerals. Because you have a full X-ray spectrum, say, for every single pixel.
Millions of them.
Millions of them. You can do something powerful. You can digitally group together all the spectra from all the pixels that the software identified as, say, pyrite.
Okay, so you grab all the pyrite spectra.
Yeah. And when you sum up maybe millions of counts from all those individual pyrite pixels, you dramatically improve the signal-to-noise ratio. You're averaging out the random noise.
And less noise means better accuracy.
Much better accuracy for quantitative elemental analysis. You can then calculate the precise concentrations of the major elements in that pyrite, like iron and sulfur, but also the minor elements, much more reliably than from a single pixel spectrum.
Okay, that makes sense for major elements, but I remember reading something really cool about detecting elements present in really tiny amounts, like impurities.
Yes, exactly. For elements that are only there at very low concentrations, maybe fractions of a percent,
Yeah.
trace impurities like the example they gave of cobalt and pyrite.
Right, the cobalt example.
You can actually tell the system, okay, whenever you identify a pixel as pyrite, I want you to dwell longer, acquire counts for a longer time, specifically on that pixel.
So you're focusing the analysis time just on the mineral you care about to boost the signal for those trace elements.
Precisely. You spend more time collecting X-rays only from the grains of interest. This significantly lowers the detection limit and improves the accuracy for quantifying those low-level elements.
And what did that reveal about the cobalt in pyrite?
It was fascinating. This high accuracy, low-level quantification showed that the cobalt wasn't just evenly spread through the pyrite grains, as you might assume. It was often highly zoned, concentrated in specific bands or patches within the pyrite crystal.
Wow.
That kind of detailed spatial information about trace element distribution is critical for understanding how ores form or how those elements might behave during mineral processing. It's a level of detail you just couldn't get easily before.
That's a fantastic example of going beyond just ID. And because you have this quantitative chemistry linked spatially to every pixel, you can visualize it too, right? With those special maps?
Yes, the hybrid maps. They're really powerful visualization tools. You essentially overlay the quantitative elemental data directly onto the mineral map.
So you see the mineral map, but colored by, say, calcium concentration.
Exactly. You could see, for instance, a garnet grain on the mineral map, but the colors within that grain show you how the calcium concentration changes from the core to the rim. That zoning can tell you about changes in pressure or temperature the rock experienced as the garnet grew.
So you're visually mapping the chemical history within the mineral. Incredible. And the sources also mentioned calculating the bulk chemistry of just a specific area, not the whole sample.
Yeah, that's another neat trick. Since you have the quantitative chemistry for every pixel, you can draw a box or outline any area on your map, maybe a specific veinlet or a fine-grained patch or an alteration zone.
Okay.
And the software can pool all the quantitative EDS data from just the pixels within that defined region and calculate the overall bulk chemical composition of that specific area.
How does that compare to traditional bulk analysis like XRF?
The sources showed it compares very well. It's been validated against methods like XRF. But the advantage here is you can get the bulk chemistry of a very specific, maybe small or complexly textured area non-destructively without having to physically isolate it or mill it up, which might be impossible, or destroy the context.
Okay, this is clearly a powerful analytical tool giving just incredible detail. So where is this power making a real difference out in the world? The sources gave some really compelling examples.
They really did. A huge one is mineral exploration. The kind of detailed mineralogy you get can totally change how you interpret other exploration data, like geophysics. Remember that example from the Idaho Cobalt Belt?
Ah, yes, the mystery of the magnetic highs.
Exactly. They were doing magnetic surveys, looking for magnetic highs, because you'd normally expect iron oxides like magnetite to be associated with the cobalt ore there. That's your target.
Makes sense. Follow the magnetics.
But when they looked at the drill core from those magnetic highs using automated mineralogy, they found something unexpected. In the zones that actually contain the valuable copper and cobalt ore.
Yeah.
The magnetite, the mineral causing the magnetic high, had often been replaced by non-magnetic pyrite during the ore forming process.
Wow, wait. So the actual ore zones were sometimes magnetically low because the magnetic mineral got destroyed where the copper and cobalt came in.
Precisely. The magnetite high was maybe next to the ore or above it, but not always in it. That completely flips your exploration strategy. You can't just drill every magnetic high blindly. You need that mineralogical context.
That insight is gold. Or cobalt, I guess. What about critical minerals specifically? That's such a focus now.
Absolutely. Understanding exactly how these critical elements are hosted in the rock, which minerals contain them, how big the grains are, who their neighbors are, that's vital for figuring out if you can actually recover them economically. Take tellurium.
Tellurium, right?
Yeah.
Often a byproduct.
Yeah, often from copper processing. In one deposit they studied, automated mineralogy identified something like 17 different telluride minerals. Just an incredible diversity.
So 17, just for tellurium.
Yeah. But it wasn't just identifying them. It quantified their grain size distribution. And it found that by volume, even though many grains were tiny, over half the tellurium was in grains larger than 35 microns.
Okay, 35 microns. Is that big enough to recover? potentially?
Potentially, yes. It suggests that a significant chunk might be recoverable using standard flotation or gravity separation methods, even if the average grain size seems discouragingly small. It gives you hope and data to work with.
And did it show what they were associated with?
Critically, yes. It showed which other minerals the different tellurides were most commonly locked with or attached to. That's essential info for designing the mineral processing flow sheet to liberate and recover them.
That level of detail seems like it would be just as important for the environmental side, for environmental assessment.
Definitely. Predicting acid rock drainage, or ARD, from mine waste is a massive environmental challenge.
Huge liability if you get it wrong.
Exactly. Automated mineralogy gives you the detailed inputs you need for better prediction. It precisely identifies and quantifies the acid-generating minerals, like pyrite,
The sulfides.
but also the acid-neutralizing minerals, like carbonates. It's the balance that matters. And it gives you textural information. Is the pyrite locked away inside quartz, protected from weathering? Or is it exposed?
So not just what minerals, but their relationships?
Yes. And you can even analyze samples after they've gone through weathering tests or leaching tests to see exactly how the mineralogy has changed, which minerals reacted. That provides direct validation or calibration data for geochemical models predicting long-term behavior.
It really sounds like it provides the detailed mineralogical blueprint needed for those complex environmental models. And speaking of blueprints, the sources also talked about using this detailed data for predictive mineralogy and data integration. What's that about?
Right, this is really interesting. The super detailed quantitative data you get from automated mineralogy is perfect ground truth data. It's high quality, high confidence.
Okay, ground truth.
So you can use this detailed data to train machine learning algorithms. You teach an AI model what different mineral assemblages or rock types look like in the automated mineralogy data.
Okay, so the AI learns from the detailed analysis.
Exactly. And then once the model is trained, you can apply it to other data sets that are much faster and cheaper to acquire over large volumes, but maybe lower resolution. Things like hyperspectral core scanning data or maybe just bulk geochemical data from XRF.
So you use the AI to predict the detailed mineralogy from the faster, less detailed data.
Precisely. The AI model, trained on the high-quality AM data, can predict detailed mineralogy or classify rock types across maybe kilometers of drill core, where you only have the hyperspectral or chemical data. You could never analyze all that core with detailed AM. It would take forever and cost too much.
So it's a way to intelligently bridge the beta gap, to scale up the detailed understanding.
Exactly. It leverages the high-value detailed data to interpret much larger volumes of lower-cost data. Very powerful for resource modeling or large-scale geological mapping.
That makes a lot of sense. And finally, the sources also touched on just basic fundamental geoscience. How's it changing things there?
Well, for researchers studying rocks, it streamlines a lot of traditional petrology work. Instead of needing separate analyses, maybe point counting under a microscope for modal abundance, then microprobe for mineral chemistry.
A lot of painstaking work.
Yeah, very time-consuming. Now, you can potentially get the modal abundance, the textural information, and the quantitative mineral chemistry all from a single automated mineralogy run on a thin section.
So much more efficient data collection for fundamental research.
Much more efficient. And that detailed quantitative data can then be directly plugged into thermodynamic modeling software to calculate, say, the pressure and temperature conditions the rock formed under. Or you can use the detailed zoning patterns in minerals to unravel complex geological histories, or analyze tiny things like microscopic sulfide blebs trapped in volcanic glass to understand magma processes like sulfide saturation and metal partitioning. It just enables deeper insights faster.
Okay, so it's already having a massive impact across the board. What's next? Where are things headed with automated mineralogy, according to these sources?
Well, the field is definitely moving fast. One big push is toward making the data itself more accessible and interoperable, moving away from closed proprietary data formats.
Right, vendor lock-in.
Yeah, towards more open export formats.
Yeah.
So researchers can easily take the data out and use it in whatever external software they want for specialized analysis, modeling, visualization. That really unlocks the potential.
Opening up the data ecosystem. Makes sense. And what about the really futuristic stuff I remember reading about? 3D.
Yes, automated mineralogy in 3D. That's definitely a major frontier. The idea is to use advanced X-ray microscopy, like lab-based X-ray CT scanners, combined with sophisticated machine learning and AI.
So scan a whole piece of rock in 3D.
Kind of. The really ambitious goal is to be able to identify and classify the minerals within that 3D volume directly from the X-ray data using AI without necessarily needing to cut, polish, and analyze the surface with semi-EDs for calibration first.
Wow, skipping the sample prep. That would be huge for speed.
It would be transformative, yeah.
Yeah.
Less sample prep, faster analysis of 3D relationships. Still challenges there, but that's where some research is heading.
So looking bigger picture.
Ultimately, automated mineralogy is becoming a really central piece in a much broader data-rich environment for materials characterization. The key seems to be integrating its high-resolution, quantitative, spatially referenced data with data from other techniques, like hyperspectral, like geochemistry, like isotopic data, you name it. And then using advanced computation like AI and machine learning to pull insights out of those combined complex data sets. That's seen as the path to a whole new level of understanding, not just for geology, but potentially any field dealing with complex materials.
It really drives home that point, though, that you need to be smart about how you use it. You have to think about the trade-offs, right? Speed versus resolution versus quantitative accuracy.
Absolutely. There's no single perfect setting. You have to tailor the workflow, the instrument parameters, the software setup to the specific scientific or industrial question you're trying to answer. Understand the compromises.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive really shows that automated mineralogy is, wow, it's so much more than just a machine that counts minerals.
Yeah, it's really a sophisticated analytical system. It generates this incredibly detailed quantitative chemical data, textural data, across scales from the whole sample down to tiny features within individual grains.
And it's clearly becoming, or maybe already is, an indispensable tool for finding resources we need, for understanding basic earth science, and for doing things more sustainably, minimizing environmental impacts.
Definitely playing a key role in all those areas.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering the power of this technology, getting this detailed quantitative blueprint of what a material is made of, how it's put together, and then applying AI to interpret these huge data sets, how might this whole approach, this way of deeply characterizing materials, start to fundamentally change other fields, other material-centric industries or sciences beyond geology in the years to come? Something to think about.